Hi and welcome back to the Journey to Nebula Sew Along. I'm Julie Herman of Jaybird Quilts and I'll be your guide on this journey. This week we are working on cutting shapes for our Infinity Stones Quilt using the Sidekick and Super Sidekick rulers. Let's get started. Before we begin sewing, we need to sew together our strip sets. We have 2 strips right now that are 2.5 inches by width of fabric, and we're going to sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam to get a 4.5 inch piece. And this is where it's very important that that 1/4 inch seam is a scant 1/4 inch so it's accurate, so that this measures 4.5 inches once we have sewn this seam, so that all of our pieces that we cut in our following steps will be accurate. You can begin sewing them together like this, or to get a little bit better yield, you can offset them by about 1 inch. You have plenty of length for this project specifically, so it's not terribly necessary, but if you want to have extra pieces for something else, you might want to begin like this so you have less waste at the beginning. So we're going to be using the same machine settings that we've been using so far in the journey, which is a 2.5 stitch length, scant 1/4 inch seam, and I'm using Aurifil 50 weight 2600. It's my favorite medium gray. If you're sewing, for instance, 2 pink strips together, go ahead and you could use pink thread. If you're sewing 2 blues, blue thread, so forth and so on, whatever you feel is best going to blend into the pieces. For this demonstration, I'm just using solid orange and yellow, so you'll be able to see the cutting in the next step. So let's just get these started. And I'm just going to sew the length of these strips all the way down until I get to the end, and then I'm going to press this seam open and measure it to confirm that it is 4.5 inches. Now that I've sewn and pressed my strip set, it's time to confirm that it is 4.5 inches, and the easiest way to do that is by taking either my Sidekick or Super Sidekick and confirming that it is exactly 4.5 inches. This dashed line should line up on my seam. I can do the same thing with my Super Sidekick, my 4.5, my dash line, the base of my ruler. Now our diamonds that we're going to cut now, we can cut with the Super Sidekick or with the Sidekick. For the purposes of filming, I'm just going to show you the Sidekick because of the space that I have, but it's a very similar process with both of them. So we'll begin by trimming the ends of our strip to the angle that we need. So we're going to line up our ruler, the top of our ruler here, bottom of our ruler at the bottom of our strip. And we're going to go as far to the right as we can without actually going into the seam allowance itself. And we'll make our first cut. Okay, and then we are going to rotate this piece around 180 degrees. We only need to do that the first time. And we're going to begin to cut our diamonds. And you're going to be cutting diamonds from multiple strip sets, but I highly suggest that you do one layer at a time because there is a seam here, and if you stack these, that bump can throw off your ruler, and if your diamonds are off, everything's going to be off for the rest of your quilt. So I do suggest cutting these one layer at a time. So in order to get our 4.5 inch diamonds, we're going to line up our 4.5 inch solid line, base of our ruler, top of our ruler, and simply cut. And we're going to continue to basically walk our way down the strip, cutting until we have cut 6 diamonds from each one of our strip sets. Now, if you are left-handed, you are going to begin with your strip set this way, and you will do your first trim. And after you have that trimmed, take your ruler, line it up, base of the ruler, top of the ruler, diagonal 4.5 inch line, and cut, work your way down the strip. Next, we need to begin to cut our triangles for the background, and we're going to have 2 different sizes. We're going to have 4.5 inch and 8.5 inch. So the first step in cutting those is cutting with the fabric strips from our background. And 4.5 should be pretty simple. Most people have a 6-inch ruler. You'll trim, line up your 4.5 inch line, trim, cut as many strips as you need. Now, what do you do about the 8.5 if you don't have an 8.5 inch ruler? A couple different options. Option 1 is to take 2 rulers, make sure you have your straight edge here, and then count, we have 6 inches here, so we need 7, 8.5. So we're going to use 2.5 inches of this ruler. We'll line that up, use this ruler, cut. That's one way that we can get our 8.5 inch strips. Another way is we can actually use our Super Sidekick ruler. Our Super Sidekick ruler is 8.5 inches. So you can either, let me move these out of the way for you. You can either do one of two things. Line it up here, cut, slide your ruler to continue, or you can fold this one more time. So you have the bolt fold, and then you can make an additional fold. You just want to make sure that you keep it totally square here. So if you have a good straight line to start, you'll be fine. And then you take your ruler, line it up, and if you do it this way, you'll have the full length. There you go. Line up your ruler here and cut along your line here. And then once you have your 8.5 inch and 4.5 inch strips, we can begin to cut our triangles. I've now cut my 8.5 inch and 4.5 inch strips, so I'm going to begin to cut my triangles. And I suggest opening this piece up as opposed to keeping it folded how it is on the bolt. You'll get the best yield that way. And if you want to cut multiple layers at once, that's okay. I suggest doing one layer at a time until you're totally comfortable, but that is an option. And keep in mind, this is more important for the 4.5 than the 8.5, that I write all of my patterns with 40 inches of fabric in mind. That's because some people pre-wash, some people don't. Some companies are more generous, some are not. It used to be 42/44, but as you know, it's not always, and rarely in these days is it 44. But if yours tends to be a little bit bigger, you may get more yield than I wrote in the pattern. So go ahead and count how many you get. You may need less strip sets. Just something to keep in mind if you don't mind cutting extra triangles. Not something you need to worry about. So the first thing we need to do is trim this strip. So since I'm right-handed, we're going to start this way. And I'm going to show you all the cutting for these with the Super Sidekick. If you don't have the Super Sidekick, you can cut the 4.5 with the Sidekick. You'll need to make a template from the last page of the pattern for the 8.5 inch triangle. So we're just going to line up the 4.5 inch line and the base of our ruler, and we're going to slide over till we get to the seam allowance without actually having the seam allowance in our piece. And we'll hold and trim. And then our first time we need to rotate this piece around. And what we're going to do is we're going to flip our ruler back and forth towards us. That way we don't have to move the strip, which if you are cutting multiple layers will be important. You'd rather move the ruler than the strip. So we're going to take our ruler, flip it towards us, line up our diagonal line, our 4.5 inch line, top of our ruler there, and trim. And we will flip it back up to cut the next one. And we'll repeat this process, flipping it up and down towards us, the length of the strip, till we get as many 4.5 inch triangles as we need. Now, if you are left-handed, you're going to begin with your strip, and let's make sure I got you in the frame. And you'll line up your ruler like this, 4.5 inch line, base of ruler, trim, and then you will end up with this, and you will do the same flipping cut the way down the strip as I showed before. If you have any questions, please let me know. So our cutting for our 8.5 is very similar to our 4.5. So I'm going to get my 8.5 inch strip. And same thing, I suggest opening, especially with this size, because if you begin cutting, you're going to have a weird wonky piece left in the middle. It's not going to be a big enough yield to create a large triangle. So here we are going to line up our top of our ruler and the base of our ruler, and we're going to be left with a pretty big chunk here. So I would definitely save this for another project. Unfortunately, not big enough to get a 4.5 inch triangle, but it is big enough to do a lot of good things with. So we will trim and take this piece and rotate it around. And just like we did with the other one, we'll flip our ruler up and down the length of the strip to get as many of the 8.5 inch triangles as we need. So there's one, and we'll flip up to get the next one. Okay, and now if I was left-handed, let's start out like this, line up my ruler, and with the edges of my strip, first cut here, and after we have that cut made, it'll look like this, and we will flip our ruler up and back, working our way down the strip. Go ahead and cut all of your pieces for your Infinity Stones quilt and lay them out like this or however you want in cute little stacks, and take a picture and post the picture on Instagram using the hashtag #JourneyToNebula to be entered into this week's giveaway. If you have any questions, please ask them wherever you happen to be watching this video, and I will be back here next week to show you the piecing of our Infinity Stones quilt.